All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating and honestly a pretty complex political puzzle. It's the story of how a country can look like a vibrant democracy on the outside while completely tearing itself apart from the inside.
So here's the core question that just doesn't seem to make sense. Picture this. It's the 1990s, early 2000s. A country has just kicked out military rule, and its people are absolutely flooding the polls. We're talking voter turnout hitting 75, even 80%. I mean, wow. On paper, that's a massive democratic success story. But in reality, in Bangladesh, the whole political system was on a collision course with total collapse. So how on earth does that happen? Well, political scientists who've studied this period think they have an answer. They've got a diagnosis for this specific kind of political sickness. And, it's not just your standard corruption or instability, it's something much deeper, way more systemic. And it actually has a name. Now, check out this quote from the political scientist Larry Diamond. And here's the crazy part. He wasn't even writing about Bangladesh. He was talking about Venezuela. And yet, it describes the situation in Bangladesh so perfectly, it's become the key to understanding what went wrong. The problem wasn't a lack of politics, it was too much of a very specific, toxic kind of politics, a politics that just consumed everything in its path. The diagnosis is called Party Overinstitutionalization. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's what happens when the two main political parties become so incredibly powerful and their hatred for each other becomes so intense that their war just sucks all the air out of the room. It stops being about governing the country and becomes a zero-sum battle for total power. And in that battle, they paralyze the courts, they infect the police, and they turn the entire government into a weapon to use against each other. So, to really see how this plays out in the real world, let's dive into our case study and meet the main characters. Because the story of this entire era in Bangladesh is really the story of two incredibly powerful women and their deeply, deeply personal rivalry. On one side, you've got Sheikh Hasina, leader of the Awami League. Her father was the nation's founder, and he was assassinated along with almost her entire family. On the other side is Khaleda Zia from the Bangladesh National Party. She's the widow of a military general who took power and was also later assassinated. So you see, this wasn't just some political disagreement over tax policy. This was a blood feud, a dynastic rivalry where each leader seemed completely consumed with avenging their family's legacy. And this personal feud created a set of toxic, unwritten rules for politics that locked the country in this totally predictable and totally destructive cycle. Here's how it worked. If you win the election, your job is to take everything, all the spoils. You use the police to harass your rivals, you give out jobs and contracts to your friends, and you basically just rule for 5 years. And if you lose, well, your job is to make the country completely ungovernable. You immediately scream that the election was rigged, you boycott parliament, and you call for these massive, crippling national strikes. They're called hartals, that just paralyze everything. And this cycle of winner-take-all, loser-destroy-all created this constant political whiplash. Just look at this. Power just swung back and forth violently. The BNP wins in 91, the Awami League takes over in 96, and then bam, the BNP is right back in 2001. Neither side could ever build anything stable because the other side's entire mission was to just tear it all down. And yet, and this is the part that just blows my mind, the people kept showing up. In both the 1996 and 2001 elections, voter turnout was around 75%. That is an incredible number for any democracy, anywhere. This massive public faith in the act of voting was happening at the exact same time that the political elites were poisoning the entire system. It's just a stunning disconnect. But a system built on pure hostility like this, it can't last forever. It's just fundamentally unstable. And eventually, all that constant political warfare started to break the actual machinery of the state itself. The collapse happened in stages. First up, politicization. The civil service, the police, all the people who were supposed to be neutral were forced to pick a side just to survive or get promoted. Then came criminalization. Both parties started relying on networks of local thugs, or mastans, to enforce their will through violence and extortion. From there, it just escalated. Political violence went from street fights to actual bombings and targeted assassinations of members of parliament. And then, the final step. They started rigging the system itself. The ruling BNP government literally changed the constitution to make sure one of their friendly officials would be in charge of overseeing the next election.
And the real-world result of all this? A complete and total explosion of corruption. I mean, when the state is just seen as a prize to be won, then public money just becomes your personal piggy bank. And get this, for 5 straight years, Transparency International ranked Bangladesh as the single most corrupt nation on planet Earth. That is a record you never want to hold.
It all finally came to a head in late 2006. The BNP government stepped down for the election, like they were supposed to, but everyone could see the caretaker government was totally biased. Protests erupted everywhere. The Awami League announced it would boycott the election, which basically guaranteed a crisis. And with the country right on the brink of total anarchy, on January 11th, 2007, the military stepped in. They forced a state of emergency, and just like that, the democratic experiment came to a screeching halt.
Okay, so it seems like a pretty straightforward story of political failure, right? But hold on, because this is where the story takes a completely unexpected twist. This is what's called the Great Developmental Paradox of Bangladesh. While all the politicians were busy fighting their war, something pretty remarkable was happening in the background.
Take a look at this. Despite all the constant strikes, the political chaos, everything, food grain production, the absolute backbone of the economy, shot up dramatically. It went from about 18 million tons when this democratic period started to over 28 million tons by 2006. In the middle of a complete political meltdown, the country was actually feeding itself better than ever.
And that economic transformation went even deeper. The entire rural economy was quietly reinventing itself. Back in the late 80s, about 2/3 of the rural workforce was in farming. But just over a decade later, that had completely flipped. For the first time ever, more than half the people in rural areas were working outside of agriculture, in things like transport, construction, and small businesses. This huge economic shift, a key sign of a developing nation, happened right in the middle of the political breakdown. It's wild.
So what do we make of this whole story? You've got this political disaster on one hand and this surprising economic progress on the other. Well, it all serves as this incredibly powerful cautionary tale, with lessons that honestly go way beyond Bangladesh.
So here are the big takeaways. First, just holding elections, even with massive turnout, is not enough. Democracy needs strong institutions and a basic culture of compromise to actually work. Second, when political conflict becomes a zero-sum war, it really can poison everything: the courts, the police, the whole system. Third, and this one's critical, the personal vendettas of leaders can literally hijack an entire nation's future. And finally, this whole story is a huge warning sign for any country where political opponents start being seen not as rivals, but as enemies who must be destroyed. And that really leaves us with one final big question. Competition is supposed to be healthy for democracy. It's essential. But the story of Bangladesh shows us that there is a line. And so the question for all of us really is, when does that healthy rivalry cross over and become a genuine, self-destructive threat to the very system it's supposed to protect?